The program says that I'm going to be talking about these two radical ideas about listening, and I'm actually not. I'm going to be talking about the invisible, invincible nature of status quo and about what that means in when you talk about organizations. That's what I'm going to talk about. But because that's on the program, I'm going to give you the 2-minute version of an 18-minute TED Talk. Are you ready? Are you sure? Because here's the 2-minute version. We don't listen. That's number one. There's a lot of science that talks about it. And here's the thing I need you to practice with me. Okay, now I'm getting ready to finish a doctorate, so people will have to call me, I said Queen Dr. Lalita Almighty, and I did not get a whole lot of agreement about that, and it hurt my feelings. So practice, I want to hear it. Dr. Amos. Dr. Amos. Ooh, that's good. One more time. Dr. Amos. Thank you. Because getting a doctorate is like being beaten into a street gang. I'm telling you, just telling you. So there's things that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about a little bit about listening, a little bit about perception, a lot about status quo, and about a concept called outliers. So I am going to be talking about that. I'm not going to be talking about a lot of the stuff that we're hearing in the news. But I don't want to step over it because I know that it's on a lot of our minds, the kind of state of the world and the state of the nation. So I want to thank all of you for being here because you could have been anywhere else, having any other kind of conversation, so thank you, okay? The thing I do want to find out a little bit more about is I want to find out who's in the room. So this is the part where it's like participation. It may look like I'm having a monologue with you, but just so that we're really clear about what's going on, there are several conversations that are happening in this room right now, even though mine is the only mouth that's moving. See, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say to you, 1, and I'm having a conversation with you, 2, and you're thinking about what I'm saying, 3, and how many of you are in this room? It's a technical term, a lot, right? So, and then when you leave, you're going to have conversations with each other, conversations with other people. Right now in this room, there's a whole lot of conversation going on. And the thing about that is, with that nature of conversation, is the conversation that you're having with yourself is always the conversation that rules the day, right? Always. Remember that. So I want to find out who's in the room, because I said I was glad that you were all here. So I'm going to have you just raise your hands and be proud when I call out a designation. If this sounds like you, raise your hands, right? So if you are one of my HR staffers, my HR peeps, training, development, employer relations, hiring, placement, promotions, benefits, compensation, HR leader, hands up, be proud. Diversity coordinators, hands up, be proud. Head of HR organizations, hand up, be proud. Okay, everybody who's I called, hands up, let's see all of them. Okay, there's a good little assortment of people here. How many people are organizational consultants, marketing, training, development, benefits, compensation? Great, thank you. How many people here are heads of companies, CEOs, maybe CFOs? Thank you. Boards of directors, boards of trustees? Great, that's great. How many here are from the government sector? Okay, he's like, it's early, I don't know yet. Okay, so the thing about it is, with some of the earlier groups that I called, the folks that are in and around this conversation about diversity, we know a lot. We know a lot. We've heard a lot, and we've heard it before, right? And some of you, the conversation that you're having is, I already know this. I know what she's going to say next. I tell you, you don't. And that could actually get in our way for the kind of conversation that we're going to have. And it can get in the way for the rest of your day, right? So there's a concept called Perceptual Filters. And this is what I'm going to give you, like the 2-minute TED Talk, like the 2 minutes of 18. I'm just going to imagine 900 people in the room like there was before. Yeah, and be a little bit less terrified. But the notion of this is, number one, that we don't listen, right? Because we're busy listening for either agreement or threat. Either I like it, I don't like it, I think I know, all of that, or This is a threat to my belief system. This is a threat to the things that I think I know. And between listening for agreement and listening for threat, it creates a perceptual filter that actually is part of your neuroanatomy that may keep you from actually hearing or perceiving new things. It can actually prevent you from hearing reality. So that's number one. See, the thing that really gets in our way here is what we know. And I want to talk a little bit about knowing. Here we have more technology here. Go Lalita, go Team L. Ooh. So if this circle represents, and we're talking about knowing, what we know, like how much of this pie wedge, if it was everything that people know, do you think you as an average person actually knows? Not knows through Google or knows through Wikipedia, but knows right now in your mind. A big chunk of the pie wedge, a small chunk of the pie wedge. It's a pretty small chunk, right? Yeah, of stuff that we know. So beautiful, so annoying. And when you think about stuff that we know, why don't you just call out some things that you know? What do you know? This is not a trick question. What language am I speaking? English. How many people know that? Terrific. What else do you know? You see how this goes? What else do you know?
Earth is round.
The earth is round-ish. Yeah, ish. Thank you. What else do you know?
Your name.
You know my name? Thank you. Prevents that little existential threat right there. What else do you know?
It's Tuesday.
It's Tuesday. So it's stuff that you know. Now, is any of that stuff a surprise? Like, I have a name, it's Tuesday, what building we're in, any of that stuff a surprise? Not really. Now, if there's stuff that we know, then it also stands to reason that there's stuff that we don't know. Exactly. Now, shout out some things that you don't know. Quantum physics. How many other people in this room don't know quantum physics? Lots of good company. You are not alone. What other kinds of things don't you know? Why the world is round? You and she need to have a conversation with each other, and you'll sort that out. I'm sure. I'm counting on you. What other kinds of things don't we know? Japanese. Very good. What other kinds of things don't we know?
Exactly how long we're going to live.
Exactly how long we're going to live. Perfect. Now, with all of those things, you have some opportunities with that. 3 of them. Like, I don't know Esperanto and I don't know Russian. Why I picked those 2 out particularly is that my fine, wonderful man, my husband of 23 years, knows both. He thinks that my life will be complete when I know Esperanto and Russian. No. So I have some options with respect to this stuff, like things that we don't know. We all have options. And one of those options is, like with Esperanto and Russian, I'm going to ignore it. I will live my life, I will be happy, and I will be proud. I'm not going to learn Esperanto and I'm not going to learn Russian. No, tell my husband, take a memo. The other option that I have is to learn it, or to borrow it, to buy it, to trade it, right? I have those kinds of options. And how many people are here are consultants? Yeah, people are buying your skill by the hour, by the project. Got it? When you go to the dentist, you're buying the dentist skill by the hour, right? As an employee, how many are your employees? Raise your hands. Yeah, you are trading your effort and the things that you know for a paycheck. So we've got options, including learning it, at which it becomes something that you know. Make sense? All right. So what do we know about affirmative action and diversity in EEO? What do we know?
It's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing. What else do we know?
Required by the government.
Required by the government? What part of it is?
Diversity, not inclusion. The government doesn't require inclusion.
It doesn't actually require diversity programming. It requires us to make a good faith effort to make sure we don't have patterns and practices of discrimination, right? So there's stuff that we know about that, right? Now, again, none of this stuff was a surprise. It's stuff that we know or don't know, and we actually know it, right? No surprises. So what do you think the rest of that pie wedge is?
What will Olivia's do?
Oh, thank you so much. Give her an extra cup of coffee on me. Thank her so much. There we go. And she's right. That stuff is stuff that we don't know, that we don't know. With me? So I want you to name something that you don't know that you don't know.
Evidently, diversity in our faculty.
I'll wait, right? And why is it hard to come up with it? Because you don't know that you don't know it. Yeah. See, the issue that we have here with the things that we know, this idea of knowledge and why I'm talking about it with respect to diversity, inclusion, affirmative action, EEO, and that whole universe, is we have another little problem in here, and that is things that people hold for a certainty, like I was told not to do this, get away from the front of the screen, that Mark Twain said that what gets us in trouble is not the stuff that we know, it's the things that we hold for a certainty that aren't so. Like, people thought in 1492 that the world was flat. So when those people sailed off to see the new world, the priests were there giving them the last rites at the shore. And when they disappeared over the horizon, they told their wives and families, wait a sufficient period of mourning and you can remarry, because they believed that those people were dead, right? We used to know that women were not as good as men. In fact, we used to know in the Bronze Age that women didn't have souls, right? Well, in the Bronze Age, they believed that a whole lot of people didn't have souls, like children, old people, people who were not seasoned in battle. Like having a soul was like a special kind of prize, like a badge, right? So there's stuff that we believed at one point to be true that actually wasn't true, right? Now, with affirmative action and diversity programming, one of the things that gets in our way here is that we believe we know. I'm doing this so I don't have to stand in front of this and talk to you, because I'm trying to do something a little different. So bear with me as I just be exceptionally clever. Yeah. So one of the things that we know about diversity, or about affirmative action programs that people hold for a certainty that's not so, is it's lowering standards. It's reverse discrimination, as if discrimination has a direction. Right? So there's a lot of stuff that people are saying. When we know that when we talk about affirmative action and EEO, anti-discrimination, what they're really saying is, on the basis of your participation or your membership in a protected class, don't discriminate. That's anti-discrimination law, that's all of it. Make sure that you don't have undue impediments for people to get jobs, to keep jobs, to get raises, promotions, and other benefits of employment. It's anti-discrimination law. Affirmative action is that we need to show, if you want to keep your government contracts or subcontracts, that you're making a good faith effort not to discriminate, and we're going to have you do a routine head count just to make sure that you're at least in par with the worst of the Joneses that are similar to your organization and the job categories within your organization. You don't have to even be any better than them. It is the floor beyond which you cannot fall. Yeah? And still, there's stuff that we hear about diversity, affirmative action, EEO, and diversity. This is just some common things that I've heard even in my own work. And it looks pretty sad, that it's painful, that it's hard, that it's difficult. There's all of that stuff. But again, what I was saying before is there are things that people hold to be true. They think they know it, but it's actually one of their blind spots. And for you and the kind of conversations that you're having, the work that you do, this is probably your biggest challenge, is things that people think that they know that just aren't so. Anybody with me on that one? Yeah, that can be a real problem. So because I did this beautiful one here, I'm going to show you the one here, because I hear some of the similar things when I talk with people about diversity and diversity programs, that it's inclusion, that you can't measure it, that it's about market, it's about being welcoming, initiatives, listening, managing, there's all kinds of stuff, but it's still, when we talk about affirmative action and EEO, the law is really pretty clear, don't discriminate. That means don't discriminate against whites, don't discriminate against men, don't discriminate against the able-bodied, don't discriminate against people who are not veterans. It says don't discriminate. It says don't discriminate in any one particular direction. It says don't do it, right? So it's very, very clear. But as we start talking about diversity, there's even less agreement about what's going on. There's even less. And that becomes a real challenge for us to address when we're dealing with this stuff out there. Because here's the thing. In a lot of these cases, like when they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, they call it kind of like the mother law as far as anti-discrimination law is concerned. But what it was passed around was 100 years that had passed between the first Civil Rights Act in the 1860s that was signed by Abraham Lincoln that said don't discriminate, particularly with respect to contracts. Honor contracts that you've made with former slaves, because at that time you could buy a house as a former slave, as a freed person, and then the bank didn't actually have to honor their contract with you and might come in and take your house away. So 100 years passed and very little changed, and that's what President Johnson noticed, that we were kind of locked in place, and that there was something that was keeping things locked in place, where even though we had the Civil Rights Act of 1860, I think it was 1863, the 14th Amendment, all of these different things that had happened, that things were still fairly well locked in place. That people had voting rights, but you actually couldn't exercise them freely. So we were trying to figure out what that was. Because see, during that time period, people thought they were right, and they actually weren't. And there was something that was keeping all of that stuff in place. I want to talk about that. Chuck Klosterman wrote this book, and this is actually what the book looks like. The cover is upside down. It's called What If We're Wrong? But what if we're wrong? And what he does is he kind of takes this kind of a swan dive into areas that we held to be certain. Like we were absolutely certain that the Beatles were awesome. But in the early days, were they? Not awesome. Not awesome. They played Hamburg 1,200 times in 4 years between 1960 and 1964, and that's what helped them become awesome. But the early recordings are dreadful. I heard one, I was like, whoa, wait a second, what happened, right? So he's looking at that, and at the heart of this book, what he's saying is, what if we're wrong? Because much of history is written about periods where we actually thought we were right, and we reflect back on it and we go like, what were we thinking? What were we thinking? Child labor, what were we thinking? But during that time period, they were right. Yeah? Yeah. And then later we reflect back on it, we realize that maybe we weren't right. When we talk about diversity, inclusion, AA, EEO, MOUSE, like all of my acronyms over here, what they reflect are periods where we thought we were right, but we had to go back and do some repair because we actually were wrong. Yeah? Yeah, and then here we are. Because again, the world is flat. Another area that we thought we were wrong, where we don't have to go back to the 1400s, is that we believed all the way to the 70s and 80s that women needed to be protected with respect to financial dealings and their own bodies. So if you're a woman and you wanted to get a credit card and you were married, you had to get your husband's permission all the way to 1976, I believe. That's our mothers, our grandmothers, and for some of us, that's us, right? That if you wanted to have tubal ligation because you didn't want to have children or didn't want to have any more children, if you had never had children, you had to show that you had visited a psychologist to prove that you weren't crazy, because women who didn't want to have kids weren't seen as being mentally stable. Or if you were married, you had to have your husband's written permission to do that. Yeah? Yeah, so there's all of this stuff that's going on. And here in Indianapolis, there's a monument near the state government center, and you'll see it. It's just an odd plaque that's standing up in the middle of nothing that marks that as a historical monument, that we were the last state in the Union to stop forced sterilization of black people, of deaf people, of people that were seen as undesirable or genetically unfit, and that was in the 1970s. The Supreme Court had to tell us to stop. There was no other country that was doing it except us and China. It's amazing. But up until the moment that they realized that they were wrong, they were right. And that becomes the problem, and that's what you're dealing with. Okay? So, with the stuff that we were wrong about, the thing to notice is that there's a particular set of things, constructs, that keep all of that stuff in place and kept it rock solid. Like in the United States, that 100 years. And while they were in it, they didn't realize they were in it, and I think that we're in another one of them right now. And what I'm talking about is a particular type of status quo that keeps everybody kind of rooted in a particular way of behaving and performing. And while we're in the middle of it, we don't know that we're in the middle of it. That's the challenge. Because remember, it went 100 years before people were able to look up and say, ooh, there's a status quo and it's actually not working here. It took 100 years. And it almost didn't happen in 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It didn't include women when they brought it to the floor for a vote. And the Southern Democrats said, let's add women because we know that no man is going to vote for his woman to have the same rights as him. And they got fooled. It was that heated. Yeah? But up until that point, people believed that they were right. Now you look back on it and you think, how could anybody think that way? And a lot of the stuff we talk about with diversity and inclusion has a whole lot of how could anybody have ever thought that way? But just recognize that in 5 or 10 years from now, there are people that are going to say, how could anybody have thought that way about gay people in the workplace, about transgender people in the workplace, about Muslims in the workplace, about having foot baths in places so people can pray. Right now, it's a little bit like we're a little bit off our heels about that stuff, but in a few years, it's going to become the new normal. But right now, what you all are dealing with as a vanguard is you all are pushing back the status quo to create that new normal, and that's not an easy thing. Y'all are feeling very proud of yourselves right now. Looking at you back there, you're like, yeah! All right. And I'm going to leave, if you leave me your business card, I'll give you a copy of any of my slides if you want them, which does not mean that I will add you to any kind of list, because I don't like it when people do that to me, and it will not happen to you. Okay, I'm not going to send you invitations and all kinds of things, but give me a couple of days and I'll make sure that I illuminate my slides or add additional things to my slides to make them make a little bit more sense, and then you can have them, including some of the links that I include in here so that you can have those too. Fair? Okay. Now, we talk about discourse analysis. This is where I get to start to nerd out a little bit. Because, I said I'm getting that doctorate. I got to show that I paid for something. Okay? I got to show that I paid for something. But there's a field of study called discourse analysis. And I think you all have been doing a lot of it and you didn't know what it was called. So I'm going to teach you a little bit of it so that you know. This is something you can walk out of here and start talking to people about. So what it starts off with is the notion that human beings are made up of what we talk about, right? Like, my cat is not made up of what she talks about, although I like to anthropomorphize my cat about what she wants, which is to keep me up in the middle of the night, and she wants what's on my plate. But she's an animal, and she's not given by language that we can understand. Human beings, one of the things that marks us over any other species is our ability to communicate in language and in words. Yeah? And in some Some theorists suggest that what human beings are is entirely what we say. Cultures, communities, who you are is not just what you do, it's really largely what you say. Yeah? Okay, now, when we look at discourse analysis, what we're talking about is this notion at the bottom, the status quo, because what we talk about and what we don't talk about gives us like what's going on between individuals and what's going on in broad groups. Fair enough? Okay. But it also says that we're composed of not just language and language communities, like Black people may be in general a kind of language community based on the way people experience us, maybe not even the way that we experience ourselves. Women may be a language community as well because of the things that we might tend to talk about. Notice I'm not saying that we do talk about, but like tendencies. French people may be a language community simply because of language and some aspects of culture. So we have a language community. Within organization, there's an in-group in the language community. There's like a language community around HR. There's a language community if you've gone to the comptroller's office. They speak a different language. I don't understand it. I got that management degree, and I'm like, what is like quantitative easing? What? They have a whole language that they speak that people inside that language group understand, and people outside that language group may not understand, right? They have badges that signify membership in a language community. It could be the way that we dress. Like when I worked for IBM, I was given a copy of a book called Dress for Success and told don't deviate from it. And when the person who handed me the book walked away, one of the Black employees, no, the other Black employee in our large office, let me just be clear about that, came up to me and said, oh yes, and don't look too ethnic, right? Because there was a badge, and that included the way that I dressed. So when we went to, like we would hang out with other consultants, the IBMers, we could tell who the Arthur Anderson people were, and we sneered the androids, the Arthur androids. But they had stuff that they said about us, and I'm not going to repeat it because it hurt my feelings. So there are badges, things that you can see, like professional people tend to look like you, right? Dress like you, behave like you, right? And people who are not considered professional people tend not to look like you. So you can look and see, oh, somebody coming in here in sweatpants, you might think maybe they don't belong. They're not part of this language community of professionals. There are rules. Now, I'm a Hoosier kid, so, and I'm from near Lafayette. Where's my reverend here? Yes, indeed. So I grew up listening to Chicago baseball. And what team did I listen to? Cubs. Thank you. So the in-group were the people that one language community were the Cubs people, and the other language people were all those other confused individuals who just didn't know any better. But if you were to go to a Cubs game, you would know that there are specific rules about where you sit and where you don't sit, because the White Sox fans knew better than to sit with the Cubs fans because it wouldn't go very well. Right? That's right. So we've got all of that, and it has enforcements, like for those poor Cubs fans, or if any of you have ever stepped out of line or stepped into line in the wrong place at Disney or Kentucky Kingdom or the grocery store, and somebody let you know that you had violated a rule. Understand me? So these discourses create a status quo that has enforcements and rules, badges of participation, a specific language or codes that are spoken, and it's got this notion called automaticity, which means it's automatic and you don't have to think about it. Now that's the good news, but it's also the bad news, because that status quo is also what cultures are made up of in organizations. And when I talk about cultures, first, there is no agreement about what organizational culture is. I'll just tell you that. That's alarming because we spend so much time talking about it, but there is no agreement about what it is. The nearest I've been able to approximate it is it's a set of status quo items, of discourse artifacts that operate below the level of conscious thought. Yeah? And then this is what you have to deal with when you're talking about diversity and inclusion. People think they know this stuff, right? So it's got like visible artifacts like how people dress. Like I said, an IBMer, you could walk into our office and see who was an IBMer and who wasn't because of the way that we dressed. That it had signage that said big old letters IBM, which back in the day stood for I've been moved because they moved us around a lot. That there may be livery, that there may be things on the side of cars or on the side of trucks, that there may be specific types of furniture or furnishings or office layouts like Google. So I was there, it was amazing. It was stuff kind of everywhere, toys and games and dogs and all, it was amazing. So there are visible artifacts that become part of organizational culture. There are behaviors like the way people are trained, the way people hire, the way people report finances, the way people do things. And then there's stuff that's not visible and not behavioral, like that you can look at and say, oh, that's this, and you're really clear about it. What ends up happening is that there are things about organizational culture that is invisible, and that's what gets back to this. Rules. And you may not even know that they're operating, but if you're somebody that's new to an organization, one of the first things they do in that slide that Leah had about onboarding is you get onboarded so that you know what the rules are so you don't violate them, so you don't violate the status quo. But the problem is if you live inside an organizational status quo, you may actually not know what all the rules are. Like you don't tell somebody when you go to a grocery store, just go in and get your groceries and then go through the checkout and come back. You don't tell them that one of the rules is that you have to stand in line at a particular place and wait your turn because you just assume everybody knows that. It's the assuming everybody knows that becomes problematic when you're bringing in people who may not be part of that rule system. And we do that all the time. So our onboarding has always been a problem because we don't know about this stuff that's running automatically in the background. We don't know. We don't know. Yeah? All right, let me take a look at my beautifully, like, tiny, ridiculously small notes. Oh, my Lord. Okay. Yeah, and some of the stuff with organizational culture is that we may say something that we actually in practice don't believe. Like in organizations that say, we really believe in telecommuting and work at home, work at work formats. How many people have heard those? Yeah. Flex time. Raise your hands. Yeah. But what we find in the literature is, though most organizations have core office hours that they want to have covered, generally from 9 to 3, you are seen more favorably if you flex towards 7 than if you flex towards 10. Because we have this old adage, it comes in our language, it's part of our status quo in the United States, the early bird gets the worm. So it's actually seen as a positive. Even if you're flexing later and staying later in the evening, we don't look at burning the midnight oil the same way that we do about the early bird. Yeah? So we say one thing, but in practice, it doesn't mean what we think. And when we're talking about people with small children, mostly women, people who have elder care issues that they need to deal with in couples, it's mostly women. Like when my father-in-law got sick, the hospital called me. When my mother-in-law got sick, the hospital called me. They didn't call my husband, and it was his parents. Because the way that we're set up, the status quo in the United States is that who takes care of the decisions when somebody is ill? Yeah. So we have this policy, flex time, that we think will work well for women, and it does work well for women. It does work well for women, but only if the organization is really being straight about what they value. We believe that. We say flex time is great or working at home is great and valued, but what we find in the literature is that employees believe that if you're working at home, you're loafing. But the truth is that people who work from home tend to work an additional 25 hours off the clock for companies. It is to the company's advantage to have people work from home. Always. But other fellow employees don't believe that because we have a status quo about how work is supposed to be done. You're supposed to get in your car, clean, hopefully, fully dressed, hopefully, and wide awake, go to a place, do a thing for a particular set of hours, and then we're supposed to come home. Yeah. Now, when we talk about status quo, again, we're talking about unspoken, automatic behaviors that make up culture and that make up organizational culture. And we also have, when we think about, hold on a second, let me take a sip. What's keeping those things in place, like keeping them fixed, these behaviors fixed, is that we have not only status quo, but we also have this notion of social distance in organizations where people have space or nearness to one another based on perception. Like, I look at you, ooh, white, that's one step back. And male, that's one step back. Right? And you have family, you traveled outside the United States, ooh, well, maybe that's one step closer because I did too. And your wife is Turkish? Yeah, I grew up in a family that were Turks. We called them the Young Turks back in the day, and it was great. So maybe that's a little step forward, but we're doing that back and forth with one another based on actual or perceived differences. Because for the most part, we have a tendency not to want to be around people that we feel uncomfortable with or feel inept around, right? Through no fault of their own. And then that becomes a problem for who? Everybody. Everybody. Because remember, I was talking about culture and how we don't quite know what that actually means. We've got this other notion called organizational fit, and I'm going to tell you, we don't know quite what that means either. I'm a recovering HR professor at IUPUI. I taught in the graduate school, and we talked about this quite a bit, like what is culture and what is organizational fit. We had a hard time with it because I asked people to define what their organization was, like pick one and define it. And they kept looking and looking and looking. It's like it's endless. So if you're talking about fit, what you're talking about is having people fit into an unnamed, unexamined, unidentified, automatic status quo that's operating below the level of conscious thought. That becomes tough because now we have people that are dancing on the head of a pin trying to figure out how to fit in to something that nobody can quite describe. You with me? Yeah, that's tough. Anybody had that experience? Like, I don't know what's going on, but yeah, there's something like the train is left and I'm standing at the station trying to figure out what happened.
Why would you want something to be an organizational fit? Why would you want people to not fit in so that we're different?
Why, thank you for my next slide. I like her, give her an extra cup of coffee. No, water, give her water. Okay, all right, because what we have a tendency to do, thank you, is we have a tendency to test people to within an inch of their lives, right? And as an organizational psychologist, I can administer a lot of psychometric tests, cognitive tests, and all of those things, and I'm not really a fan of them. I'm not, like the FIRO-B, the Myers-Briggs, the full range of leadership, the Herman Miller brain dominance instrument to talk about what's happening in your neuroanatomy. Oh my God. Because I don't know that that makes a difference when we're having conversations about organizational fit and we don't even quite understand what the culture is. Because this is the thing that I noticed, and this is what kind of said to me there's something really up here. And that is, there was a group of leaders who we had tested, and I think it was the Myers-Briggs. And what I found is that even though the scale scores were different, like INTJs and INFPs and all the ENTJs and all that what people tried to do was figure out the style of the person who was in charge and then tried to mimic that. And I saw it over and over and over again. And I'm like, why are you pretending to be an ENFP when you're an INTJ? Like, why are you not being all of who you are? We are designed to try to fit in. We are wired to try to fit in. In some ways, what a lot of the literature talks about is we are a bit like herd animals. We try to fit in because exclusion from the herd is death. Yeah? So we try to fit in. So again, I'm not a fan of that because regardless of reality, we like to try to turn outliers into inliers. We try to knock off their edges and have them pretend to be something that they're not. We want them to fit in. Like, I really want you to make sure that you fit in well in our organization. That's a scary concept because it's loaded with a whole lot of stuff that we don't quite even understand when we're saying it. Yeah, fit in. Good luck. Fit in. And then again, you're dancing on the head of a pin. Now, the thing is that outliers, they do tend to have different points of view. And here, I'm not talking about devil's advocates or contrarians. They irritate me. They irritate me, right? The people who you say yes and the automatic thing that they say is no, I'm not talking about those folks. That's a personality tick of a different kind. What I'm talking about is people who sometimes see the edges and contours of the status quo in ways that we don't. And they ask that question like Chuck Klosterman's book, what if we're wrong about that? Why are we doing it that way? Do we really need to do it that way? Have we measured the value that we get from doing it that way? Like having people come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, are we sure that that's really valuable? Are you sure? Are we sure? So they're asking those kinds of questions, and because they're asking those questions, they're challenging, because the part about the status quo that's great is it keeps order and it's easy. There is not a lot of stuff that we need to think about. When we have people in an organization that are all roughly Christian or Christian friendly, there's not a whole lot of stuff that we need to think about. The office will be closed in these kind of days, the office will be open in these kinds of days. We don't have to worry about people working on Sunday or not working on Sunday. So there's things that we have to deal with. But we know that in some religions there are people who need to be home for religious holidays from which work is to be suspended. I grew up Baha'i. So there were religious holidays, there were about 16 of them during the course of the year where we were forbidden to work. And then trying to explain that in the workplace with people who didn't get it. Like, so why is that you're not coming in? What is that again? On a Tuesday? What is that about? Yeah? So, but the value is of outliers is that not only do they potentially see some things different, but these are people in technology who may see a new innovation that you don't see. Or they may see an application of something that you had done before that maybe if you turn it a different way, that it may produce a whole different kind of result. These are people who may see avenues into new markets that you don't see. Yeah? Yeah, they may see something. Or if it's a customer, these are the early adopters. And in technology, we love those. As most of the people that I work with and around technology, we love early adopters. We love those. I'm an executive coach by training, an HR person. I love the people who were coaching early adopters, that I said, hey, look, what about it? And they said, we don't even know what it is, but yeah, I want to do it. I'm like, great, let's figure it out together. It was back about 20, 25 years ago. So we love those early adopters, but again, we're trying to, with outliers, we're trying to either corral them or neutralize them or eliminate them. Yeah, we freeze them out. We don't include them. We don't invite them to lunch. We don't invite them to in-group meetings so that they can see what's happening. And then that becomes a problem for those outliers, that they're just out. And again, because of emotional labor, we're trying to turn outliers into inliers, and they get burned out and they leave. Anybody have that experience? I knew your hand would go up. Thank you for being proud. I appreciate that.
I'm tired of trying to be a queen.
Tired of trying to be what?
plan.
Yeah.
What you do for a living.
What do you do for a living?
Appreciate it. Oh, I'm an engineer. I'm an aerospace engineer.
Perfect. See, I was from Purdue and I started off in I started off in biomedical engineering until I took my first psychology class and said, "Ooh, I can fix them when they break."